Alright, so here we are with the second video about the Trojan Saga. We got the early history of Troy, some of the early history of Sparta, the Dioscuri, and their sister Helen. A little bit of background about Paris as well. So we finished up the last video with him being recognized as a prince of Troy and being received by King Priam as his son. But before that, one of the major things that sets up all of the Trojan War happens in what we call the Judgment of Paris. Where can I get that there? There it is. Okay, the Judgment of Paris. This is not a judgment against Paris. This is Paris serving as a judge. So when Peleus and Thetis get married, remember Peleus and Thetis are the parents of Achilles, right, a hero of the Trojan War. So when Peleus and Thetis get married, they neglected to invite the goddess Eris, the goddess of discord. So she's angry, and she throws an apple into the wedding party that's inscribed with, quote, "to the fairest," right? F-A-I-R-E-S-T, in case that didn't come across, right? To the fairest, or to the most beautiful goddess. So Aphrodite, Hera, and Athena, all three want to be considered the fairest. And so Zeus, knowing that this is going to be nothing but trouble, sends them to Paris, who at the time is still a shepherd boy. And he's chosen because of his own beauty, okay? And he is supposed to decide. So, of course, all three goddesses offer him rewards for choosing her as the fairest. But he actually chooses Aphrodite because she promises to assist him in the seduction of Helen. Now, it may not have been that specific to start with. Maybe she just promised him the most beautiful woman in the world, but it turns out to be Helen. It's because of his judgment for Aphrodite and thus against Athena and Hera that Athena and Hera are both hostile towards Troy, which is interesting given the fact that Athena's temple in Troy has the Palladium, which is very special to her. According to Homer, he actually insulted the two goddesses, but praised Aphrodite during his judgment, and that's why they were especially hostile towards Troy. Okay, so that's a little background about that. Okay, so now we're going back to after Helen has run off with Paris, and you have the expedition to set off to get her back. One of the most famous sayings is that Helen has the face that launched 1,000 ships, and that is in reference to the huge expedition that was set off to get her back. And so the expedition is made up of many of the men who were, in fact, suitors of Helen before she married Menelaus. And Menelaus and Agamemnon are brothers-in-law. Menelaus is the king of Sparta. Agamemnon is the king of, we'll call them the Greeks, just to keep it simple, okay? So when Agamemnon and Menelaus summon the warriors of their countries, not everyone is excited to go or anxious to participate, right? So, and I think you'll get an idea of why as the story progresses. Agamemnon and Menelaus were not necessarily the most beloved kings, especially Agamemnon. All right, so first hero who didn't want to go is Odysseus here. Odysseus actually pretends to have gone crazy to avoid going on the expedition. And he tries to show everyone that he's crazy by plowing up all of his land and sowing it with salt, which is famous for causing infertility in the soil. However, Palamedes sees through his guise and proves that he hasn't actually gone crazy, because he takes Odysseus's son and puts him down in front of the plow, or in the way of the plow. And when Odysseus does not plow his son under, it shows that he was in fact sane, and so he goes on the expedition. The other major hero of the Trojan War is Achilles, and he was also not excited or anxious to go to war and get Helen back. Again, if you'll remember, Peleus and Thetis are his parents, and his mother, Thetis, wanted to give him the gift of immortality, even though he's just a demigod. So when he was an infant, she rubbed him every day with godly ambrosia, and each night she laid him upon the hearth fire to burn off his mortality. However, Achilles' father was unaware that this procedure was supposed to make his son immortal, and so when he comes home and cries out in alarm at seeing his wife holding their baby in the fire, Thetis becomes offended, and she goes home to her father Nereus, the old man of the sea, and leaves Achilles to his mortal fate. However, other versions of the myth have Thetis attempting to protect her mortal infant son by dipping him in the river Styx. The waters of the Styx would render Achilles' skin impervious to the likes of any mere Trojan arrow, but Thetis forgot that she was holding him by the heel during the dipping process, and so that is the only part of his body that is not protected. Achilles was raised by Chiron, the good centaur, and he was tutored by Chiron, the good centaur, and he was tutored in the arts of the military, art, music, and painting. Now, when the summons from Agamemnon and Menelaus come out, Achilles disguises himself as a woman and hides out on the island of Skyros. And this will come up again later, of course, but Achilles is given a choice at this point, and he can either choose to live a long life of mediocrity, of never being remembered, or a short life of distinction. And so he chooses the short life of distinction, and that is how he winds up as part of the Trojan War. The war does not get off, I shouldn't say the war, but the expedition does not get off to a smooth start, because we have to gather all of the heroes of the expedition, and Homer gives quite a catalog of all of the ships and all of the warriors who gather at Aulis to embark on the expedition. According to Homer's catalog, it wasn't just 1,000 ships, but it was actually 1,200 ships. Artemis, however, once all the heroes have gathered, Artemis causes unfavorable winds to hit the port so that the ships cannot leave. And she does this because she's offended because someone in the expedition has killed a stag that was sacred to her. So Calchas, the prophet, says that the only way they're going to be able to leave is to satisfy Artemis's anger, and so Agamemnon must sacrifice his daughter Iphigenia. Now, in the Euripides version of the story, Artemis steps in and saves Iphigenia, but in the Homeric tradition, she is sacrificed and they are able to leave the port. Right? Keep that in mind, because sacrificing his daughter is going to come back to haunt Agamemnon when we get to the very last part of the class and the return of the heroes. All right? It's also at this point that they learn of the importance of Achilles to this successful expedition. Calchas shares with them through this portent of the serpent and the chicks. This is a vision that he has and interprets that Achilles is necessary to the success of the expedition. Now, it's shortly after this that the prophet Calchas dies. There's another prophet on the expedition named Mopsus, and Calchas challenges Mopsus to a contest by asking him how many unripe figs are on a particular fig tree. And when Mopsus answers correctly, Calchas dies because he was fated to die when he meets a prophet better than he. So that's a little piece there before they leave for Troy. Right? And you can go back and look at this artistic depiction of some of the heroes of the Greeks, right, and heroes of the Trojans. All right. Okay. So the arrival at Troy it had a rough start to begin with, but also they have two significant delays along the way. Delays for their arrival, but also things that will prove to be a delay in the ultimate resolution of the war. So the first one is Philoctetes. Philoctetes was given the arrows of Hercules, or Heracles, upon Heracles' death. Remember those arrows from Apollo that had been dipped in the blood of the Hydra, so they were poisonous, right? Those same arrows. Well, Philoctetes is bitten by a snake on the way, and when his wound on his foot begins to stink, they set him off of the ship on the Isle of Lemnos, and he's left there for 10 years, right, because of this stinky wound on his foot. Now, it turns out that they learn they can only capture the city of Troy with the help of the arrows of Heracles. And so he is eventually sent for, retrieved, and his wound is healed by the field surgeons at Troy. Could have just done on the way, but whatever. And he is the one who will wind up shooting Paris and killing him. Now, the other significant delay is with Telephus. Telephus is a son of Heracles, and he is a king in Mysia, or Mysia, when the Greeks came to the island, because they'd lost their way, right? They came to the wrong place, thinking it was Troy, and they think they're waging war against the Trojans, but they're actually in the wrong place. And Telephus is wounded by Achilles in this mistaken battle. Now, an oracle tells Telephus that the only way he can be healed from his wound is if the one who has wounded him heals him. So he sets out after Achilles, possibly disguised in rags as a beggar. And when he finally finds Achilles, he has trouble appealing to him to heal him. So Telephus winds up taking one of the other Greek heroes, Orestes, as hostage. So in order to get Orestes back, and the fact that it was revealed that the Greeks, or that Telephus is actually Greek by birth, again, a son of Heracles. He's Greek by birth, and the Greeks would never take Troy without the aid of Telephus. So they need the arrows of Heracles, but they also need Telephus, a son of Heracles, in order to successfully take Troy. Now, if Telephus being a son of Heracles is confusing, remember those 50 princesses that he slept with before his labors even started, and how he had 50 sons by those 50 princesses? Yeah, that's where he came from. So once they find out that Telephus is Greek by birth and that they need his aid to defeat Troy, Achilles heals him, but only on the condition that he would tell the Greeks how to get to Troy, because they're still lost. Okay. When they land at Troy, there's two things that you need to be aware of. Okay, here at the very end. It's very important to be the first person to die in this epic battle. So the first person who, it's fated, okay, that the first person to land at Troy, to step foot on the shores of Troy, was going to die. So Protesilaus sacrifices himself by volunteering to be the first Greek on shore. After he dies, his wife, Laodamia, prays to the gods to be able to see him again one more time. So Hermes takes him to Laodamia, so they can visit again for a few hours, and when he is taken away to the underworld again, Laodamia kills herself. So the first Greek to die in the Battle of Troy is Protesilaus, who volunteers to meet that fate. Cycnus here, right, this guy right here, he is the first Trojan to die in the war, and he dies at the hands of Achilles. Achilles strangles him. So the siege of Troy is 10 years. Remember what we said at the very beginning. All epic battles take 10 years. The war between the Titans and the Olympians, 10 years. The siege of Troy, 10 years. All right. So we don't have all of that, or the first 9 years, let me put it to you that way, is not what features prominently in Greek mythology. It's the 10th year, that last year, that we have the most information about, because that is what Homer covers in the Iliad. So we will pick up with that in